We are going to be discussing our top 10 favorite books. 5 that are my favorite, 5 that are Sandra's favorite. I will start us off. My first book is The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. This book is, I call it the Success Bible. And from it, I have adopted so many of these principles and I live them in my daily life. And that was basically the criteria I used to choose my 5 books were what are 5 books that I read that instead of just becoming shelf knowledge, like, oh, that's interesting, I know that, or I've heard that before, and sticking it back up on the shelf, what fundamentally changed me and became a part of my life in a new way, or caused me to do things, think things differently. And the Success Principles is the first one of the list. I read that back in 2016 or 2017, and I have over time adopted so many of these principles. The first one being, and it is the foundation of the book, is accepting 100% responsibility for my outcomes in life. And when things invariably go awry, as they always do in life, I go back and look at what is it that I'm doing? What is the response or new thing that I can do to change the outcome to something more useful for me? So
that's great.
That's my first one.
That's your first one. So my first one is going to be what is probably now considered a classic, and it's Dr. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. I love this book. It was an awakening for me, and I was still an adolescent, and I was babysitting for actually 2 therapists, and they had this book on their coffee table. And I just remember it was catchy, and I just picked it up and I just started to read it. It was pretty simple, and I found it extremely profound because it was one of the first books that now I could say, and back then I didn't have the language for it, where spirituality meets psychology kind of thing. And so to me, it was absolutely beautiful. And one of the takeaways was that really, regardless of everything, to press forward. Sometimes it is through suffering that we can get to the other side. And as I was telling you earlier, Nicola, it kind of reverberates maybe on the periphery of when Marcus Aurelius would say that the obstacle is the way, and that we just have to continue pushing forward, and that there's a lot of purpose. So for me, this is a book that periodically through the years I've actually picked up as well, and I'll just open a page and I'll just read it and get inspiration.
I love that. And Sandra, it tells me a lot about you, because I can be honest with you, I babysat a lot when I was a kid. Okay. And I would not have picked up that book on the coffee table and read it. I would have been watching MTV.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
I'm going to be really honest about that. There was no way I would have read something so edifying at such a young age. So I'm extremely impressed by that.
Well, thank you.
And I think I would be very different if I had the wisdom at such a young age to actually read things like that. However, I found my way here eventually, so it's good.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, what is your second? Yeah.
All right, the second one on my list is The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. And that book was so impactful because it really helped me understand that I don't need to change everything overnight. I can focus on very tiny behaviors every day to be 1% better each day. And a couple of the things that still, even several years later, after reading The Slight Edge, that I do daily is I read 10 pages of nonfiction every day. And I send a card almost every day to people. And in the book, it teaches you to do thank you cards. They're not always thank you cards. They're sometimes, hey, how you doing cards. But as a result of The Slight Edge, I've focused on doing things smaller for consistency, because in this book, you learn how your behaviors compound, the good ones and the bad ones. And just by making a new choice to be 1% better each day, you can fundamentally transform your year and your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And there's so much of that because now you're doing teaching a lot of this as well, aren't you? You know, which is fantastic. And we've got to definitely talk about like habits and all this kind of stuff that you were talking about. So that's a side note, but I love that. That is fantastic. And I love the idea about the cards, sending cards. I don't know if it's just we're birthday twins, so I don't know if it's something that we're aligned with, but I love sending cards, and I somewhat got out of the habit of doing that. So you've inspired me. So we'll see what comes out of that. Okay, so my second book, right? So the second
Yep.
book that was actually my mother gifted it to me, and I was, I don't know, maybe about 20 or something like that. And it was The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And so that book was a very simple read as well. You didn't have to have these big educated words. Really, a third grader could actually read it. What's striking about this book is that it's extremely profound. It's a very deep philosophy. And sometimes you may read it and say, okay, well, this is a concept that I already know. And so one of mine was, do not take things personally. And how many times have I read that chapter? Don't take things personally. And how much have we read it? And it wasn't for lack of making efforts to not take things personally, but it wasn't until eutaptics, FasterEFT, that I really understood with this work how to not take things so personally. And so when I do, then you just like we learn, right? We step back, notice what we noticed, and then we start working on that. However, this book is, I think, fundamental. I think it gives greater insight. And Don Miguel is just fantastic at this book. And of course, he wrote other books, but that's what I love about this. It was very, very simple teaching, but not easy to practice.
Most things are not, especially when you seek to be consistent with them. And
That's
I have
right.
actually read this book.
Okay.
So, and it makes me think of the fourth agreement, which is always do your best. The most important part of that was that last part, and understand that your best varies from day to day or is different from day to day. Because I realized
Right.
it's not about beating yourself up for not being perfect. It's just recognizing that on different days, our best is it's fluid, and you're just doing the best you can on any given day. So there was something really impactful about that one for me.
About that
So I
part.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But you did
that
like it
agreement.
though, didn't you?
Oh, I loved the whole book,
Great.
and all of the agreements are powerful. But for some reason, I think as a recovering perfectionist, that one really resonated with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's interesting because not taking things personally, right? That was also
Yeah.
something,
Yep.
especially when you wear your heart on your sleeve sometimes. And I was younger woman, and always
Yep.
wanting to do my best, and sometimes, so that's a lifelong lesson for all of us. All
I
right, my
agree.
friend, what is your third?
My third is one that we read last year. Both my husband and I read this one, and I think he's read it twice because it was that impactful for both of us. It's called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. And I really love this book. And, you know, I work a lot with clients, and one of the things that comes up invariably in sessions, if I'll ask someone what makes this bad for you, and they'll always say, almost always, not always, but they say it's uncomfortable. That's what's making it bad for them. It's uncomfortable. And in this book, Michael Easter teaches how we have gotten so far away from getting uncomfortable that it's just this bad thing that limits us in all areas of our life. And so I have actively been making myself more uncomfortable. I do things. I take cold showers. I go for walks out in the cold. I'll even walk out in the rain or the wind, which normally would keep me inside. I wear a weighted vest. He has a number that he shares. I think it's 25 and 3. That's like a formula for getting outside more and quieting the mind and nature. But it's 20 minutes of outdoor walking a day. Look to do like 5 hours of like a bigger thing a month. that could be like a 2-hour hike, but accumulate that time. And then 3 days that are basically off the grid, where you're in nature, camping or something like that. And yeah, that was a really great book.
I've got to read
Very
that
inspiring.
one. Now you've got me curious, because I also teach my clients that as well. And I think we can't speak enough to the discomfort, because right when we think, because that's where we need to go. We need to go through it. I always tell people, don't go around the fire, go through it. I mean, you've got to go through the other side. And
It's where the growth is.
I know. And there's a level of definitely discomfort. And it's really interesting to notice how you also not just have it as a abstract concept, but that you actually push your physical body. I've done that too. And that's what we do, right? Like, you were a fitness trainer. And of course, I was a real big workout buff before we knew we didn't have to work out for like hours a day. But the lifting weights right. I mean, you could speak so eloquently about that. It's like building a muscle, and there's a point where it's uncomfortable, like you feel like you can't do it. I mean, I always like to equate the physical, so that's great. And that must be the Wim Hof that you're doing, like taking the cold shower. Just sidebar, right?
Yep.
On that one. So, but that's great, Nicola. That's really, really beautiful. So, which brings me to,
which one's your third?
Yeah, to bring me to the The Call to Courage by Ryan Holiday. And it sort of piggybacks. I could see how it piggybacks with the book you were just mentioning. Because courage is, I'm a big, we're both big Stoic fans, philosophy. We enjoy Stoicism. And so Ryan Holiday speaks a lot about Stoicism and how it's applicable to every day. So it's not just the Greeks or the Romans who tried to walk in a life that seemed purposeless, And so what Ryan Holiday talks about a lot in this book is what it means to be courageous, right? And it has less to do with physical stamina than it does that inner resiliency, and how to be able to muster up that courage. And he gives applicable he gives little stories, vignettes on different people's lives, maybe even military people. And so that you can kind of bring it into context, and then gives you some ways of being able to practice what it is to be a courageous person, and sometimes doing things that you don't always want to do, right? So that's that. Okay, you're next.
Tiny Habits. That's my next one, by BJ Fogg. And that's a fantastic book, because I love learning more about habits and creating positive habits and pruning out the ones that weren't serving me anymore. And this book is really brilliant. It teaches you how to basically custom design behaviors that you want, coming from very small, simple ways. So I have added so many tiny habits in my day. And, from something as simple as when I make like a bulletproof coffee each day, and I use my Vitamix blender. What happens is sometimes I turn it off and I forget to turn it down. So when I go to make it the next day, it's on like the highest of the highest setting, and it'll startle me, and it goes like, it's just way messier than it needs to be. So just from that, I'm like, okay, I need a tiny habit here. And I'll just say it to myself out loud. Like, after I turn off the blender, I will turn the knob back down again. And that becomes the tiny habit. And then you celebrate it, because one of the things I learned in tiny habits that is actually turns on its ear what I've spent so many years teaching people is that, it doesn't take 66 days to make a habit. It doesn't take 30 days to make a habit. It takes emotion to create a habit. And so then I'll celebrate after, and I'll just give myself a little high five or say, good job, Nicola. And that wires a habit in much faster than just having to do it over and over. So that book is great. So I have custom designed all kinds of behavior, like how to move more, where can I do squats in my day, just to make sure that I'm always doing some motion to counter the sitting. I focus on getting a lot more movement. So that's a great book if you want to learn how to create habits that really suit you, and how to make habits that don't suit you really inconvenient, so that you stop doing them as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I really like that. Yeah, I'm really much into habits as well, and I'm getting back more into doing that. And there's actually some. I don't know if you've seen one of the latest. It's like a 6-minute video. Andrew Huberman, neuroscientist. So he's got some. They've got. I don't know if it's the latest, but it sounded like it's sort of the latest neuroscience research of how effective habits are and what to kind of do. So I'll be sending that to you. I might put it in the link actually for people just to kind of look at. It's just a 6-minute video about how effective that really is. So yeah, so talking about habits, my next one is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey. And this book is fabulous. Again, it's an older book, but I think that a lot of that older leadership applies, and it's so important, I think, in today's age. And basically what I like about this book is that I think it helped me really become a better leader for myself in creating not just habits and again, not perfectly, but years ago, just really creating that for myself, understanding what is not important and so forth, and what is important, who is important in my life, and then just stepping into better leadership when you're managing other people. So that would be that. And now you're next.
That one's on my to be read list. I haven't read it yet. I've read bits and pieces and I'm familiar with a lot that's in the book, but I really want to either listen to it on Audible or read it one day, because I know that's a really great one. Okay, my 5th book is The Success System That Never Fails by W. Clement Stone. And it's a short book, but it was a wonderful book. And one of the behaviors that I've taken up from this book, and I've combined it with tapping, but basically the author teaches you to repeat an affirmation 50 times as you fall asleep at night. And I don't only do it, I'll just make sure I repeat the affirmation in a quiet time, and I combine it with tapping. And I make sure I do that pretty much every day. There's not always the same affirmation, but I have noticed that 50 times, that when I start a new affirmation, after a few days, 3, maybe 4 days, that it literally does change my internal dialogue, because the affirmation becomes the habitual thought rather than something else that I used to think. And when I started to apply that years ago, reading that book, that was one of the most amazing things. Because something would go, if something went wrong, there was all of a sudden a new thought. And I was like, wow, okay, great. So it was really impactful. And the rest of the book is chock full of wonderful things, but that's still to this day, 6 years, 5 or 6 years later, I still do that as a way to create new thoughts and new ways of thinking that has proven so useful for me.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Your end.
Yeah, I think that's a very important book. That would be on my to-do to read, to read list. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, and so my last book also is a short book, and it's Essentialism by Greg Mcgowan is how I would pronounce it, but he's an English guy. And this book really is, again, simple at reading it, nothing sophisticated, nothing difficult, and yet it's about practicing it. And so what I loved about this book is that he gives you practical steps, if you will, not just the philosophy behind it, why it's important to say no to people and things that do not benefit your growth in achieving a goal, or and whatever it is, and it means being disciplined, and knowing kind of in a way loosely, your why are you doing this? Why do you want to achieve that? So kind of reverberates a little bit the Simon Sinek, start with the why or something, that one book. But I really like this book, and I actually recommend Essentialism really to anybody who wants to just find out how they can prioritize their life in order to make room for what's important. Because at the end of the day, if it's not essential, like Greg says, if it's not essential, it should be completely off your list. And he kind of talks about people and relationships as well. So that's really it. Those are the
Sounds like a great one. I have that on Audible, so you inspired me to re-download that so I can move it up in the queue to listen to.
There we go. There we go. All right. So this has been really good. Any last words that we could impart to our audience?
Well, pick up one of those books and let us know what you think.
That's right. Pick it up. All right. Thank you, birthday twin.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun. Awesome idea.
Fun.